this guy will be a great filmmaker, and I'm going to grab him first, and he's going to direct this script, The Elephant Man. And he came in, he helped rewrite it, he helped on the makeup, and he helped on the beautiful black and white, photography. David Lynch is a bit of a genius. He really is.
Mel, took a chance on me, and that's and it happened to work out for him. But it could have been different.
Mel Brooks changed David Lynch's life. In 1977, Eraserhead had opened and was slowly gaining traction on the midnight circuit, but David's immediate situation hadn't changed. During this time, David renovated a home alongside his dad, built sheds and wrote a script called Ronnie Rocket.
I was building sheds in my backyard. I built 3 sheds during that time, and I had a paper route to support myself during Eraserhead, delivered the Wall Street Journal at night, and then I'd find wood and things on my paper route, and I built the shed out of found wood and things like that. And I wrote a script called Ronnie Rocket and tried to get something going with that.
Eraserhead was not setting the world on fire in terms of money. But I did get one meeting from a studio. A guy invited me in after he didn't see Eraserhead, he heard about it. And he invited me into his office. And he said, "What else you got?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You got anything you want to do?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to make this film called Ronnie Rocket." He said, "What's it about?" I said, "It's about a 3-foot-tall man with, a red pompadour, fake red pompadour, who runs on alternating current electricity. And he's asked me to leave his office."
David gave the script for Ronnie Rocket to producer Stuart Kornfeld, who loved Eraserhead, but Stuart also couldn't get anybody interested in the script. And at this point, David started thinking about directing something written by somebody else.
I waited a long time to try to do Ronnie Rocket, but I came to a point where I needed to see if there were any scripts out there that I could direct. So I called Stuart and I said, "Stuart, do you know of any scripts that I could direct?" And he said, "David, I know of 4 scripts that you could direct." And he says, "Come to Nibbler's and I'll tell you." So we went to this coffee shop, sat down, and before we even ordered, I said, "Stuart, please tell me the names of these scripts." And Stuart said, "Okay, the first script is called The Elephant Man." And poof, a bomb went off in my head. I said, "That's it."
The original script for The Elephant Man was written by Eric Berggren and Christopher DeVore, and had been optioned for a year by producer Jonathan Sanger, who was a friend of Stuart Kornfeld's. With Lynch in mind as a director, Stuart and Jonathan went to 6 different studios but couldn't get anywhere.
But Stuart had given the script to Anne Bancroft, and she read it and loved it, and she gave it to Mel Brooks. And Mel Brooks said, "I want this film to be the first film Brooks Films, his new company, will make." And he said, "Okay, the 2 writers are in. Jonathan Sanger, you're in. Stuart, you're in. But who is this guy, David Lynch?" And they said, "Well, Mel, he is a filmmaker. He made a film called Eraserhead." And Mel said, "I've never heard of it. I need to see it." And I heard this, and I said, "It's been great knowing you guys." And so the screening was set up, and for some reason, I was asked to be outside when the film finished. And you can sort of imagine my condition. But the doors burst open, and here comes Mel Brooks running at me, arms wide open, saying, "You're a madman, I love you, you're in."
Mel Brooks deliberately removed his credit as executive producer from The Elephant Man to avoid confusing the audience given his comedic background, but he was very involved behind the scenes. Mel had a lot of input on the script, which went through extensive revisions, and he'd already directed a few films and knew the business well. On the other hand, David was completely new to this world and its rules. He initially planned to be as hands-on for The Elephant Man as he was for Eraserhead, and he wanted to do the film's makeup, which Mel agreed to. So before flying to London, he made a full body cast of John Hurt, and when he arrived in Wembley, he worked for several weeks in a garage on the makeup.
I was supposed to do the makeup for the Elephant Man, and during the summer of 1979, I worked in a garage in Wembley, going to work to try to, do this. And I had what I thought were some, great ideas, but they turned out to be not great. And so I failed in my attempt. And that, led to 4 very, very dark days when I thought I would be fired off the film. And I was having nightmares about this. And then when I'd wake up, so-called real life was so much worse that I wish I could go back into the nightmares. And Mel was going to come over, and I was sure he was going to let me go. But Mel came over, and during the time, before he came over, Jonathan Sanger made a deal with Chris Tucker to do the makeup. And all Mel said was, David, you shouldn't have, even worried about that. You should just be thinking about directing, and thank God for Chris Tucker. So it turned out, again, Mel was golden.
Mel Brooks, it was his, company that did the picture. And Mel turned out to be my greatest ally. And he's plenty powerful and to keep everybody else absolutely away. And he was fantastic. And I was really lucky.
David was a Renaissance man, and without being hyperbolic, one of the greatest artists we've ever had. He was undeniably a great filmmaker, painter and master of sound, but he also made furniture, music and sculptures. On a Razorhead he built the sets, and while he never disclosed how he made the baby, given the plaster casting of John Hurt for the Elephant Man, he clearly had some sort of experience with casting and props. In his book Room to Dream, David mentioned he used glycerin, baby powder, latex rubber and some other materials for the makeup, and when John Hurt tried a piece of it on, he couldn't move. Producer Jonathan Sanger said it was basically a mask, and this failure was so devastating for David that he considered leaving the film altogether at that point. As gifted an artist as David was, he didn't have the knowledge or skill set required to do the makeup, and so Christopher Tucker was brought in.
Every time David Lynch has been interviewed, he's always said that Christopher Tucker saved my life. I'm profoundly thankful that he'd actually worked when it might not have done. It didn't happen just like that. It had to come with lots of thought and concentration at the time.
Chris Tucker had abandoned a career in opera before becoming a full-time makeup artist, and notably he was part of the team that created the makeup and prosthetics for the Mos Eisley Cantina scene in Star Wars. He was brought in on the Elephant Man just before they were due to start shooting, and there was a mega panic.
We had no time for a start. That was problem number 1. Problem number 2 was that we had to work out a way of actually doing this, because as far as I know, no makeup had ever had quite such an enormously complicated build-up with such very thick areas, especially on the corner of the neck, where you'd normally make an edge, you couldn't make an edge, and so on and so forth. So technically it was very difficult just for a start.
Let's remember, the entire film hinged upon this. The entire cast and company were told that if the makeup didn't work, that was it. Their film was a goner.
Chris was invited to the Royal London Hospital Museum to view a life-size cast of Joseph Merrick, and knew it would be helpful for his work if he could borrow it. Percy Nunn, who was the head curator for the museum, was initially unenthusiastic about the project, but after speaking to David and Jonathan Sanger, he realised the film was a good thing and was happy to let them borrow it.
We had a cast which was a death mask of the original Elephant Man on which to base things. We also had his skeleton. We had photographs, the 4 or 5 or so of the original photographs that actually existed.
The cast of him in plaster was pretty phenomenal. If, Chris Tucker, who built the makeup, he was allowed to, for the first time, since it had been cast, to take that head and in different parts, whatever he wanted, out of the hospital. Mr. Nunn let him take him out to his studio to make the makeup for the Elephant Man. But if you ran your hand over the head, of John Merrick, you could still feel hairs that were pulled out of his head and then lodged into the plaster. So there's real hair coming out of this plaster. It was pretty phenomenal.
The cast was helpful to a point for Chris, and the hair left inside the cast enabled him to identify the colour of John Merrick's hair. However, even with the cast and photos, it still took around 8 weeks to design the film's makeup.
They insured me for £2 million. They obviously thought I might get run over by a bus. There was a fat lot of chance of that. I never got out the door. The longest day we did, working non-stop, was 49 hours. That's 49 hours without going to bed.
Chris started first with John Hurt's own anatomy and then made some modifications from the real Joseph Merrick to accommodate his performance. For example, Joseph Merrick's real lips were very thick, but this was changed for the makeup so that it didn't impede John Hurt's ability to speak. Both John and Chris wanted to make something that was realistic and approximated Joseph Merrick, but they didn't want to make an exact copy of him.
We worked on the teeth. I worked with wax and continually altering them until we got exactly the right look to John's own mouth and with something that he could actually speak with, because the problem, he had to be able to talk and do all the rest of it.
Actually, we even got a bit of the twist into that.
That's right, yes. We twisted as much as we could. We twisted his own mouth around.
Your own mouth?
Yeah, from the inside.
We twisted it and manoeuvred his own anatomy inside his head around as much as was possible. Then when we did that, when I'd made the teeth, then we did the plaster cast of the head with the teeth in. And from that, I then had to sculpt the whole thing.
I had to design something that would distort John Hurt into something that I could then model the Elephant Man on top of, with the edges coming in, and all the joints coming in the right place and all the overlaps coming in the right place, because it comprised of some 15 sections that all had to overlap. And the 2 sections that made up the head, the top part, which had hair implanted, that had to be reusable. So it was very complex.
In the original script of The Elephant Man, John Merrick was supposed to appear sooner with his makeup on, but due to how long it took Chris Tucker to do the makeup, this was changed. The shooting schedule was rearranged so that the scenes without John Hurt were shot first, and the Elephant Man is continually teased at the start of the film, but doesn't appear in full makeup until around the half-an-hour mark.
The art of makeup is to alter somebody's appearance without it being seen what you've actually achieved. The idea is to help the actor portray the part in whatever way you can.
John Hurt's performance in The Elephant Man is really beyond the beyonds. The way he speaks and moves even under heavy prosthetics is so beautiful and moving. He really gave his all to this role, and it's perhaps the role he is remembered for most.
I went in at 4:30. We used to sit around and have coffee for that bit.
In the morning?
In the morning, yeah. Start makeup at 5 o'clock. We'd finish the makeup at 12 noon. Then we'd shoot from 12 noon with the running buffet for everybody else, not for me, because I couldn't eat. The last thing I had was at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is 2 raw eggs and some orange juice mixed up together through a straw. But so we'd shoot from 12 till 10:30 at night, and then it would take another hour and a half to get it off. And we did that every other day.
6 or 8 hours sometimes, for John Hurt to get into John Merrick. But John Hurt said as the makeup was going on, a transformation occurred, and he just felt he just knew John Merrick.
The Elephant Man was nominated for 8 Oscars, including John Hurt for Best Actor and David for Best Director. But cinematographer Freddie Francis was snubbed, and there was no recognition for Christopher Tucker's makeup work, which sparked industry uproar. At the time, the Oscars didn't have a category for best makeup and hairstyling, but The Elephant Man changed that, and in the following year the Academy added the category. It's somewhat ironic that a film that didn't win any Oscars changed the Academy forever, but this legacy is perhaps greater than any win on the night would have been. The stream flows, the wind blows, the cloud fleets, the heart beats.